All right, this video is going to talk about just some other events that took place during the Cold War. It's going to really talk about some McCarthyism, some more war, a period called Detente, and then some more war again. All right, and so this is going to be known as we're going to focus on, I should say it's going to be known as, we're going to focus on what happened at home. Because we've been talking a lot about what's been going on internationally between the United States and the Soviet Union. But internally, there was a lot of chaos happening within the country as well, and that was known as the Red Scare. All right, red is a color typically associated with the color of communism. So when you say like the Red Scare, that means they're afraid of communism. Right? The Soviet flag's red, Chinese flag is red, etc. So we talked about this tension that was created between these countries. We want to talk about what happens on the inside. Well, typically when there's a common enemy, we're against communism, that can create a united front. Like everybody's against it. The United States, everybody's against it. For a while, like in the September 11th attack, we were all against terrorism. We're like, let's go get the terrorists. So you think it'd create a united front? Nope, it doesn't. There's a dramatic fear of communism. And that the communist spies were spreading into our government, they were spreading into our society, that they were manipulating our way of life. And people would make these wild accusations against their neighbors for being communists. And just these accusations that people would make, lives are ruined, relationships get lost, people get shunned within a community. They were fired for being accused of being a communist sympathizer. I mean, this is a big deal, being called a communist. And talking about how we had a common enemy in terrorism, the way I can equate this best is that this is what people feared at the time. And so if you would say like, hey, you have a communist living next door, I'd be like, I don't care. But if somebody came up to me and said, hey, you got a terrorist that lives next door, I'd be like, whoa, arrest that man, get that guy out of here. And so if you really focus it on like, what are we at war with, or what do we have fear of today? You talk about like terrorism. That's what we fear today. Well, back then it was a fear of communism. And so one person that used that to his advantage the most was a guy by the name of Joseph McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin. He made these wild accusations against the Democratic Party. Obviously, he was a Republican. He called President Truman and Marshall. He called them communists. They're bedfellow to communism. He made all sorts of wild accusations, promoting himself, trying to ruin other people's careers while simultaneously promoting himself in the spotlight. And he really became famous saying, I have a list of 200 names of people that are working in the State Department, working with the communists, trying to bring our government down. He said the army is infiltrated. There was a McCarthy army hearing where he said the army's infiltrated with communists. They're supporting the communists. Makes all these wild accusations, and eventually he's going to be found out as a fraud. But what he did is he created just a division within. He became a personality basically that created a division within the country. Like you were, created this. That person's a communist. This person's a communist. A lot of finger pointing, a lot of questioning. Your government officials questioning. It created just an uneasy feeling within the country. All right, and so that's going to be known as McCarthyism. So this was a very real thing. It was just a politician who, instead of trying to unify the country, really created a lot of division. And so that's going to be really where a lot of this anti-communism and this fear is going to come from. And the United States is going to also then get involved in another war. Right? They're going to get involved in another war in Vietnam. All right, and so Vietnam, which was formerly part of French, this whole thing used to be controlled by the French prior to World War II. Well, after World War II, they tried to reclaim this territory. The Vietnamese are going to rebel, and they are going to declare independence, and they are going to fight off the French for about a period of 10 years. And the U.S. had supported the French, but they are trying to rebel, and eventually what's going to happen is that North and South Vietnam is going to be divided. All right, and it's very similar to Korea in the sense that the Koreans, the North is communist, the South is very anti-communist. Both sides, they want to have a unified country where it's just one country. The U.S. is going to be heavily involved in the South. The North is going to be supplied with weapons by the Chinese and by the Soviets to promote communism there. All right, so the North is going to be led by a guy named Ho Chi Minh, and he's going to be backed by the Soviet Union. The South, Vietnam, is going to be led by Ngo Diem, who is going to be a fanatic anti-communist. He's going to be backed by the United States. Both leaders desired to see a unified country. Diem began to brutally oppress the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese communists within the South, arresting, torturing, killing nearly 100,000 communist sympathizers. All right, and as the Vietnamese began to resist Diem's rule, the U.S. increased their presence in Vietnam. Diem is going to actually end up getting killed in a military coup. All right, uprising within his own government by his own generals. He's going to end up getting killed, but that left a power vacuum. And so in the mid to early 1960s, the U.S. is going to really ramp up because they don't want to see this country fall into chaos. All right, so we have the North and the South. Once again, we got the North and the South. The North is trying to influence the South. They're trying to supply and promote an uprising and military support. They are trying to provide military personnel, et cetera, to get the South to fall to communism. All right, so why is the U.S. all of a sudden they're going to start to really ramp up how many troops they send? Over 500,000 are going to be there in 1968 by the late 60s. All right, and so to maintain this control, well, we've already talked about this with the Truman Doctrine. This is the U.S. policy. Our job is to keep containment. But the real big fear that they had is that they didn't want. They believed that if Vietnam fell, and this was part of Korea as well, but they believed in this theory called the domino theory, that if Vietnam fell, if we go back to, sorry, I'm going to skip back here. Jeez, I didn't realize this that far. If Vietnam fell, if South Vietnam fell to communism, then that would lead to Laos falling, to Cambodia, to Thailand. That whole peninsula would fall to communism, and then that would just spread like wildfire. It would drop like dominoes. When one domino gets knocked over, they all get knocked over. And so when they're all lined up, it's just going to spread all through India, or all through Asia, and it will just continue to spread. And so they're like, we need to stop that domino from falling right now. And so by the late 1960s, the U.S. had over 500,000 troops trying to prevent the country from falling to communism. U.S. citizens began to grow tired. This is a picture from Kent State. There was all sorts of protests that were going on in Kent State. In Ohio, the Ohio National Guard got released to put down a protest, actually killed 4 people. But it was became a very unpopular war because we were sending so many people to fight a war that it's like, man, we're not even, like, this doesn't have anything to do with us. We got people getting drafted, getting sent. Millions of billions of dollars are being spent. Millions of people are dying. And it just became really, really difficult. In Vietnam, the fighting was very difficult because you can imagine if you're walking through at night, these are the little, if this guy was all in camouflage, he'd be pretty difficult to see. But jungle warfare was hard to locate the enemy. Plus, it was hard to it was difficult to discern South Vietnamese, which ones in South Vietnam when they're there, which ones are allies and which one are supporting the Viet Cong, the communist Vietnamese. And so it really was hard, not only just fighting in the jungle and trying to this type of warfare, but also just identifying the enemy. And it seemed like the Americans cared more than the South Vietnamese did. And so in 1973, you have very little support for this war at home. You have very little support really in South Vietnam at this point. And then the U.S. abroad is looking bad that they're involved in this. And so they're going to decide to end their involvement in Vietnam in 1973. Now they'll still send money and weapons to help the South Vietnamese government, but in the end, they spend billions of dollars. 58,000 Americans die. Roughly 1 to 2 million Vietnamese died on both sides, civilians and military, to prevent communism from spreading. But in the end, South Vietnam is going to be taken over, and they're going to be united under one communist flag. And worse yet, the dominoes that they feared, they never fell. It didn't spread like wildfire. It didn't spread all throughout Asia. It didn't create a communist world. So all of this effort, just really lives lost, money spent. It just seemed like, what are we doing here? And so what that's going to lead to is a period known as détente. Détente is defined as a release from tension, an easing, an improving of relationship between countries. And so the U.S. is going to enter this period with President Nixon. He's going to start to cool things off with the Soviets. Why? Because everybody they were just tired. Like, we just spent all this money, effort in the Vietnam War. We're fighting this enemy. We realized we could benefit from each other. We could help each other. We could benefit from trading with each other. We could benefit by not living in constant fear of having a nuclear attack happen against one another. So we could benefit by limiting our military. And Nixon's going to be one to visit. He'll be the first one to visit China and Moscow, the capital of Russia. Nixon and the new leader of the Soviet Union, Brezhnev. I call them Eyebrows McGee. Those things are legit. Those are like caterpillars on those things. They're going to sign a series to limit their military agreements to limit their military. That's called SALT. There's several SALT 1, SALT 2, where they agree to reduce their weapons, to calm things down, and to make things more peaceful between the two nations. So it's like, whew, hallelujah, the Cold War is over now. Not so fast, my friend. From détente to war. The Soviet Union is going to, in 1979, is going to invade Afghanistan. In December of 1979, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan to try to help support basically a civil war that's breaking out to help up to support this Afghan communist government. This effectively ended the détente period because you have the Soviet Union invading another country. The U.S. is going to they're going to start to supply weapons to the Afghan rebels. And the Afghan war is going to be very similar to what the Vietnam War was to us. There's a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of time, and it's going to eventually fall. And so it's going to be a really black eye to the Soviets, but we're going to do the same thing that they did. We're going to supply them with Stinger missiles, these things that can shoot down the helicopters. We're going to provide them with military equipment, and it's going to help prop them up. Now, the negative to that is it's going to be we're going to end up fighting Afghanistan several years later. We're going to be fighting against the weapons that we supplied them to help fight the Soviets. And so that's always the negative when you're giving a bunch of country, a bunch of rebels in the country, a bunch of weapons, because when they take over, and then if we have a problem with them, now we're fighting against those weapons. The détente period ended. The U.S. is going to elect President Ronald Reagan that will seek to end the Cold War. And that'll be what we get into next.